Thank you for coming to today's webinar, which we are calling Holy Wisdom Monastery, a Net Zero Refuge. My name is Laura Doolin Perez, and I am the Director of Donor Services here at Holy Wisdom Monastery, where our mission is to weave prayer, hospitality, justice, and care for the earth into a shared way of life. We are here to share and inform, answer questions, and celebrate this exciting time of moving to net zero energy. You've seen pictures or live, I'm sure, these solar panels. That's just one part of this energy transformation that we'll be going through over the next year, and that we'll outline for you today. And we're doing this because it's our mission to care for the earth. We know that climate change weighs on the hearts of many, and Holy Wisdom is a spiritual home to many. And just as we take care of our home, we also want to take care of our planet, and eliminating carbon emissions as much as possible is critical for the future of our lives and the lives of all of the creatures on Earth. So this is a huge initiative for Holy Wisdom Monastery, and there's a lot that we could possibly cover. Because of that, we're going to keep the presentation to just around 30 minutes, with 15 minutes of Q&A at the end, wrapping up around 1:15 Central Time. So please take advantage of the 15 minutes of Q&A. If there's anything you'd like us to expand on or clarify, that's your time to tell us what you want to know. And we're also happy to follow up on any lingering questions you might have off the webinar. We've had a few more people join, so thank you all for coming. As I mentioned earlier, please stay muted throughout this presentation. There will be time for Q&A. The way we will take questions is through the Zoom chat box. So please, as the presentation is going along and when we get to the question and answer portion, please put your questions into the chat, and then we'll pick those up at the end. And we can also follow up afterwards too. Okay, so now that's all out of the way. Let's get it moving forward. My name, once again, is Laura Doolin Perez, and I'm the Director of Donor Services at Holy Wisdom Monastery, where our mission is to weave prayer, hospitality, and justice and care for the earth into a shared way of life. After me today, you will also hear from Sister Mary David Walgenbach, from Toby Grabs, our Director of Operations, and from Mark Hanson, the Director of Sustainable Services at Hoffman Planning, Design, and Construction, who has been a very helpful partner and guide to the monastery over the years in our building sustainability efforts. We are located on 130 acres, about 20 minutes north of Madison, Wisconsin, just on the north edge of Lake Mendota. We have a wide range of offerings. Just to glance over these in case you're newer to us or haven't looked at everything we offer recently. We offer retreats to both individuals as well as groups and organizations. We have hiking trails that you can see here on this map, daily prayer and Sunday assembly worshiping community, Friends of Wisdom Prairie community that cares for our prairie, oak, savanna, and woodland. We have a library, we have Benedictine oblates, we have tons of spirituality and environmental programming. We have some kids programming called Kids on the Prairie in particular, volunteer opportunities, and so much more. So that's a little bit about what we do. One more moment while I have this map up here. Throughout this presentation, you'll see some photos, and you'll hear about, I think, two buildings in particular. One is called the Monastery Building, and one is called the Retreat and Guest House. The Monastery Building, I don't know if you can see my cursor, is the biggest yellow block here. That was built in 2009. And then the Retreat and Guest House is the slightly smaller building. Oh, where did my cursor go? There we go. Slightly smaller building here to the southwest that was built in 1954, if I'm correct. So just keep those in mind just to situate them here for you. All right. All of this land has been lovingly restored from farmland into prairie, woodland, oak savanna, wetland. And at the center of this restoration effort, and at the center of our entire 70-year history, have been the Benedictine women of Madison. So to speak about the sisters community, I would like to hand it over to Mary David Walgenbach.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here and to talk with you about the Benedictine sisters at Holy Wisdom Monastery. As you know, sisters in general, Roman Catholic sisters, have gone through many changes since Vatican II, which started in 1992. And we had a school at that time, which we closed in 1966, at the request of several Protestant ministers and one important leader, Rabbi Zdrzinski, who convinced Bishop O'Connor that this would be a good thing for the Madison area to have a place where people of any Christian or non-Christian denominations could come for recreation, in terms of recreation for the soul, the spirit, place to walk, place to have silence, a place to pray together, etc. So that tradition began with us in 1966, and it continued to progress through the next 20 years, starting with people of various religious traditions spending their time for retreats or renewal at Holy Wisdom. At that time was called St. Benedict Center. And what we always did was to invite groups to pray with us, to tell them a little bit about ourselves. And that continued to progress. And rapidly after the Summer Institute for Mission, which is ELCA and ALCA combination of having their summer school for mission here. And they did that for about 15 years for 5 weeks. So we got to know and pray with people each year, a different group. So people say to me, well, how come you're an ecumenical community now? How did that happen? That you now have Christians of any denomination available and discerning to become members. And our first member came in 1998, and that is Sister Lynn Smith, who is a Presbyterian minister, and she's been with us for 22 years. So that's the uniqueness about the sisters community, that membership is open to any Christian from any denomination. We follow the rule of Benedict, which is a rule about living in community, how we pray together, how we work together, how we care for one another, how we care for the young, how we form the newcomers, etc. So it's a crucible for building community and building character. The Rule of Benedict was written in the 6th century, and over those years, it has been pulled here and there and everywhere, and so it has consisted of all these years. So that's the important part. Now, we've also been in Madison 70 years. It doesn't seem like that, but it is a reality. The place gets here older like we do, and now we have a mission that includes not only prayer and study, but also care for building communities. So we have the Friends of Wisdom Prairie, who help us enormously with caring for the prairie and the trees. We have oblates, men and women who also study the Rule of Benedict and adapt it to their lifestyles, who come here frequently and are supporters of the monastery. We also have a great group of co-workers, which we could not do without. And we've had a history of having wonderful, wonderful co-workers who take the mission and walk with us. Sometimes they're behind us, and sometimes they're leading us, and sometimes they're beside us. And that's a great combination of collaboration and respect for one another. So we have a Sunday assembly, a worshiping community. It's ecumenical, it's open to anyone. We are a welcoming community. We have young people who come, kids on the prairie who come, and all of those wonderful blessings. So Benedictines care for the earth and they are prayers. That's what we're known for. We pray 3 times a day together, and we sit together 2 times a day in silence for 20 minutes. And our work, I just described what our work was, to build community among the people who live and work here, and to be a source of community for those who want to continue to belong in a special way. And so, having said all of that, I must say, I've been here 62 years. Sister Joanne has been here 66, Lynn 22, and Everline is working on her 4th year and hopes to make final commitment this fall. So give us a look, give us a try. We're there for you and for one another, and we try to serve the world in our Benedictine ecumenical way. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Mary David. That was a great summary of so much that could be squished into I know just 5 or 6 minutes here. So next up is Toby Grabs, our Director of Operations. He will give us a bit of an overview of our mission of hospitality, as well as how the retreat and guest house plays into this net zero energy project.
Thanks, Laura. As Laura mentioned, I am Toby Grabs. I'm the Director of Operations at Holy Wisdom Monastery. In that role, one of my responsibilities is to oversee our guest services department. And our guest services department is one of the ways that we live out that mission of hospitality. And where does that mission come from? Well, we follow the rule of Benedict, which says, one part of the rule says to welcome all who present themselves as if they were Jesus Christ. So that's a pretty important part of what we do. One of the locations where a lot of that hospitality, one of the primary locations where that hospitality takes place is in our retreat and guest house. That's where individual retreatants can stay. We do day retreats, overnight retreats for individual retreatants. We have group meetings and group retreats, both day and then overnight, multiple nights. We have some groups that come and do retreats here for a week, 10 days even. We have day meetings. Individuals come here and utilize the retreat and guest house for spiritual guidance. Many of our programs are held here. So the retreat and guest house, as you can imagine, is a fairly important location, a fairly important building for Holy Wisdom Monastery, specifically for that mission of hospitality. So how did this net zero energy project come about? Over time, the HVAC system, which is heating, ventilation, air conditioning, it's like the environmental controls, the heating and cooling and venting of the building is HVAC. The HVAC system in our retreat and guest house is around 30 years old. It's old and inefficient. In a lot of cases, it's failing, and it's old enough at this point that some of the parts of it can't be replaced. For instance, the in-room fan coil units, which do the actual heating and cooling in individual rooms, a lot of them no longer work, and unfortunately, we can't get parts for them anymore. So in some cases, when one of them goes out, it is very difficult to fix them. The control system for the overall HVAC system, parts are no longer available for that. Our boiler is old and inefficient, and we were notified a number of years ago that it needs to be replaced at some point. Also, it is powered by natural gas, which is not readily renewable. So that kind of goes against our mission of care for the earth. And then the chiller, which runs our air conditioning, is old and inefficient and routinely needs servicing. I kind of think of it this way when we think of our mission of welcoming those who present themselves as Jesus. We want to welcome them as if they were Jesus, but not similar to the conditions as to what Jesus was born into. And so we have to worry about making sure that when people come to the retreat and guest house that they are comfortable. So with a group of us, we looked into a way of modernizing the HVAC system for the retreat and guest house, and decided that we would try to get some of the money that was available through grants from the Office of Energy Innovation to see if they would help us pay for upgrading that HVAC system, and doing so in a way that we could go net zero. And several years later, we are now embarking on that, and we'll talk a little bit about the net zero and what that means when Mark Hanson with Hoffman Planning, Design, and Construction will be talking about our net zero program next. But we got that grant, specifically $575,000 from the Office of Energy Innovation, to go net zero with our retreat and guest house. As part of that, we will be converting from natural gas, old inefficient boiler, to geothermal. And again, Mark will talk more about that in a little bit. It's a fairly ambitious thing, and we're very excited about it. As part of the upgrade, the retreat and guest house will be closed down from July to mid-September of 2024. But I want to assure everybody that the rest of Holy Wisdom Monastery will remain open. The grounds will remain open, the monastery building will remain open, and so we will continue to be taking reservations for meetings and events and meals, all of those that could take place in our monastery building. Our hermitages will remain open as well. And then for other overnight accommodations, we'll be working with local hotels to provide lodging for that 8 weeks while the retreat and guest house is shut down. And next we have Mark Hoffman is going to go into some more details about the project.
And here's the technical moment of our presentation where I stop sharing and Mark starts sharing his screen. As we're transitioning here, if you have joined recently and didn't hear the beginning part, if you have any questions, there will be Q&A at the end. Please put your questions into the chat box if you would like to have those ready, or as you come up with any as the presentation goes along.
Well, good afternoon. I take it, Laura, that you can hear me just fine?
Yep, you got it.
Good. And the screen is up. Wonderful. Well, I just want to thank again the audience for taking the time out of their busy lives to learn about the significant new work at Holy Wisdom Monastery. In addition to being a director of sustainable services at Hoffman, I have been a long-term volunteer at Holy Wisdom Monastery. What we're going to be looking at, or this significant work, is really kind of a play in 3 acts. Act 1 occurs back in 2009 at the construction of a highly sustainable monastery. At that time, we included, the sisters included 20 kW, kilowatt AC of solar PV. And that was a big step at the time, because that was back in the dark ages when solar was really expensive. And it was during that process of when in Hoffman, I would add, did the planning, the design and construction of the monastery. It was during that time that 2 things crystallized. First was that a highly sustainable building, this happens to be a commercial building, could be built at conventional cost. This was not something only that the rich can do. It's something that is at a conventional cost. And indeed, we received a platinum LEED rating And when we compared the project costs at the end per square foot compared to other buildings, we were at a very conventional cost. The second thing that occurred at that point in Act 1 was that net zero energy just might be achievable and affordable in the not too distant future. And as part of caring for the earth, this became a goal that was really established at Holy Wisdom Monastery. Act 2 occurs 5 years later, when indeed solar PV photovoltaics become much cheaper, and 126 kW of solar was added at the monastery and also was fed into the retreat and guest house. Act 3 is where we are now. And Act 3 is adding 300 kW of solar PV in front of the meter, and we'll come back to that point later. And we're adding 300 kW of solar PV, as well as a battery, 125 kW, 110 kWh battery. And as Toby noted, we're converting the retreat and guest house to geothermal energy. So here is the Act 1, or the result of Act 1 with the Holy Wisdom Monastery. And you can see the original solar PV on the roof, what could be done at that time. This is Act 2. And you can see at this point, and this was importantly working with third-party investors who were interested in investing in solar and sustainable practices. And with this, the Holy Wisdom Monastery was able to add 124 kW of solar PV. And you can see we basically took all of the available roof space on the monastery and the retreat and guest house to add this solar. And what we found at the time, and again, this comes back to the affordability theme, by using third-party investors, this investment was able to be made without requiring the upfront investment by Holy Wisdom Monastery, and even including the payments to the third-party investors as part of the third-party financing. The operating costs of the monastery and the retreat and guest house were reduced. So again, this affordability, both for the monastery, but as an example for others, a key theme. This is now one visible aspect of Act 3. And you note in this particular image of the solar field that the solar field, the panels are tilted at different angles. Well, this is a picture as the installation was just being completed. The panels are adjustable, and indeed they have just been adjusted to all a very vertical, or if you will, south-facing orientation. If you will, the steeper panels, you'll see a couple of them are already set there, but these have been adjusted for now for winter operation, and they will be manually adjusted come about April 1st or April 15th to summer operations. I would note that the position of the solar field in the prairie area behind the retreat and guest house, or to the west of the retreat and guest house, really took account of two important things. One is we wanted to disturb the prairie as little as possible. And this segment of prairie was already limited because it is on a portion of the land that has the dredge spoils from the Lost Lake dredging when Lost Lake was restored some years ago. The leftover or the dredge spoils were placed on the land here, and it limits what can grow. And so, if you will, we were doing as least amount of damage to prairie as possible, and can, of course, still allow prairie to grow up in between. The other important thing in this location of the new solar field is that it avoids the location of some Indian mounds. And they are, so we wanted to stay away from that, even though the particular Indian mounds out in this field had been basically plowed over by previous agricultural practices before the time of Holy Wisdom Monastery. But we did want to very much respect the location of those mounds and therefore clearly stayed away from those. The other aspect of Act 3 is the geothermal system. And in here, the images are not of the new installation going in, but from the geothermal system that was installed at the monastery. So you can see a well drilling rig in action, drilling one of the wells that was for the monastery. And on the left image, you can see the various, some of the well heads and the lines of fluid, closed loop systems coming from those wellheads that feed into the utility building that houses the heat pumps. And those particular wells for the monastery are located under the parking lot at the monastery. The new well field with 16 wells, I believe, is going to be located just to the west of the retreat guest house and adjacent to the solar field. So what does this all mean in terms of solar energy production, in terms of providing for 100% of the energy needs of both the monastery and the retreat and guest house? And you can see in here the solar installation by year in the left column, and center column is what is the cumulative solar capacity in kilowatts, alternating current AC, and then what percent of 2025 annual energy use. And you can, and this is our estimate of what both the monastery and the retreat and guest house together require for energy, and what percent of that can we provide with all the solar. So the original solar would have only provided 3.4%. The addition of solar in 2014, which is 126 kW plus the earlier 20, this is cumulative solar capacity, brings it up to about 27%. And just a note here, when this was proposed, that solar, if it had all been allocated just to the monastery building, and had it been all allocated just to the monastery building at the original levels of energy use at the monastery building, it would have come close to 60% of annual energy use. But since that time, the operation of the monastery building has expanded in terms of the hours of operation and very much weekend operations. And thus the energy use has gone up there, and these estimates take account of that. So you can see now in 2023 with the solar field, the new solar field you just saw, that the cumulative solar capacity, adding 300 kW AC, is now going to be up to 446 kW. We are estimating this will provide for about 102.7% of annual energy use. And we will be both managing the solar fields and the buildings to try to bring the performance into this level. We would like to certainly be at 100%. And if we can be net exporters of energy to the grid and our neighbors, all the better. So just a final summary comments on mission and goals. In terms of key missions and goals here, the addition of the geothermal at the retreat and guest house and the solar, and by the way, battery energy storage that will be connected to the monastery building. It provides for net zero energy. And as I've just mentioned, we do hope to have a solar surplus, and a very small portion of that solar surplus surplus will be needed to offset the minimal remaining natural gas use. Recall that the commercial stovetop at the monastery still uses some natural gas, as does the inline water heating. A core financial objective is to reach net zero energy without increasing annual operating costs. And this is being accomplished through the use of third-party investors, again, as we did in 2014, but this time with the innovative Direct Connect MG&E tariff. I'm not going to take a detour off into the details of this, but let's just say it is our understanding that MG&E will be the first client in MG&E's Madison Gas and Electric Service territory to use this tariff. So this is a bold move at something that is innovative, but it was only by going this path, that is this Direct Connect tariff in front of the meter, that MG&E would allow an interconnection. And so this becomes an important aspect. And then finally, a core financial objective was to minimize the capital costs for replacing the HVAC system at the retreat and guest house, which, by the way, some of that parts of that system go back to 1954. So some of it is really old. Some of it was, as Toby referenced, 30 years old. Some portions are more like 60 or 70 years old. But as part of this financial objective, there was the Office of Innovation grant that was awarded to support the geothermal and battery. And of course, we've been very fortunate. The new IRA, Inflation Reduction Act incentives have come into play, which will provide for 40% of the cost of the geothermal system, which, after that is considered, geothermal was the lowest cost way to do the renovation of the HVAC system. And I'd note that those incentives in aggregate, the IRA incentives alone in aggregate, are estimated now to be approximately $1 million. So what does this mean for net zero energy? What does net zero energy mean, and why does it matter? Well, net zero energy means that Holy Wisdom Monastery produces enough on-site renewable energy during the course of the year to meet all its energy requirements. Sometimes it's exporting to the grid, sometimes it's importing. After the geothermal energy system is installed next year, as Toby mentioned, almost all the energy use at both buildings, the monastery and the retreat and guest house, will be electricity. There are times when the solar PV systems are exporting excess power to the MG&E distribution grid, and other times, for example, at night, that Holy Wisdom Monastery receives power from MG&E. But during those hot summer days when the MG&E grid faces its highest demands, Holy Wisdom Monastery's solar PV will usually be exporting power to the grid, and thus in those times of greatest need will be helping our neighbors. And net zero energy, walking away from the carbon fuels, fossil fuels, is needed, as we all are painfully aware of, for caring for the earth. And so with that, I'll turn this back over to Laura for a few comments on donation opportunities. And I will turn this over, noting that I've already made my donation as part of my support for this project, as one of the early donors to the solar and geothermal effort.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for being such a supporter in so many ways of the monastery. Yeah, as some of you have probably already heard from us, we've gone through a lot of different financing opportunities, gotten a number of grants recognized, different ways through the Inflation Reduction Act in particular, where future operating costs of the monastery will be greatly offset by moving to net zero. We are between all of those things, you can count them up in different ways. The upshot is that we've identified over $2.2 million of those various offsets, grants, reimbursements that the monastery will benefit from, and can reduce from the fundraising amount then that we have to raise. So as some of you have heard, we are inviting donations toward this project. Left to raise is about $850,000. So it's all in total, if you count it up in various different ways, it's a $3 million project. But thanks to Mark and Toby and a lot of people who are working way above and way behind the scenes, who have made things like the Inflation Reduction Act available to us to make this a possibility. The amount left to raise is in reach, about $850,000. So we are inviting donations now through the end of the year. And in the early part of next year, we will also be reaching out to our community members, our retreatants, organizations in the Madison community. So if you would like to support this project, or if you know someone who might be interested in getting involved in a net zero monastery and would like to support this project, please connect us. Please consider giving a gift. And we're so thankful to have you all here today as our friends and supporters. So now moving into questions and answers. I see one question here. Just a reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the chat and we'll be going through these. So Dennis asks, what is the life of the solar panels? How often do they need to be replaced? And likewise, what are the maintenance costs for the thermal systems?
On the solar panel question, our estimate would be very conservatively 30 years, but we're actually would expect that they would last well beyond that, perhaps 40 or more years. And I would note that in our experience with Hoffman, where we've helped with over 30 solar PV systems, we have only lost one panel so far, and that was to a gunshot at one of our locations. But we have lost none to hail damage. We have lost none to wind. And so that speaks, and that's some solar projects going back now almost 20 years. Of course, a number of our projects are very recent, but there is great durability in the solar PV. The geothermal systems is the other part of the question. That system should be a very long-lived system. The main things that will fail, eventually start failing, will be some of the individual heat pumps. And those, as that occurs, like any mechanical system, I don't know how many have ever gone through, for instance, have you needed to replace your air conditioning unit at your house? I had one that did fail. That was installed in, I believe, 1986, and it failed about 7 or 8 years ago. So those are long-lived as well. So the heat pumps will fail from time to time. You'd be thinking at least 15 years, but more likely beyond that. And as those need to be replaced, they can be replaced. I'd note that one of our older high schools with geothermal that Hoffman has worked with was built in 2002. And, that well field is just fine. And I have not heard any reports of any significant amount of failure in the heat pumps. So I'm sure they must have had a few by now that have failed, I would expect, but I don't know that offhand. So long-lived systems, and and that's important for all of our systems need to be maintained, whether they were the gas boilers, which of course we're talking we need to replace at the retreat and guest house now. Well, these other mechanical systems their time will come too.
Thank you, Mark. Dennis also asked, this has been in the news lately. I've heard that cooking with natural gas emits dangerous side effect gases, harmful to kitchen staff, perhaps other staff as the monastery or guests. Maybe Toby, I know I've heard considerations or ideas here and there about replacing the gas cooktop in the kitchen. Do you want to address that?
Sure, yes. Long term, we would like to get away from natural gas in the monastery kitchen. Currently, it's required to have it the stove and oven properly vented, and so most of those byproducts or the gas itself, leftover gas itself, is being taken out of the building. But long term, yes, we would like to go to an induction top, and then electric for the ovens.
And I believe your ovens are already electric, if I recall right. It's only the gas top that's only the stove top that's gas, I believe, Toby.
All right, any other questions? I also noticed some staff on here, so if there's staff who are thinking, oh, they didn't mention something, let us know. Neil is giving a shout out to Catherine Cruikshank as the chairperson of the Capital Committee or Capital Improvements Committee. She is on the Zoom here. Yes, thank you, Catherine. Mark and Toby could speak more to her offerings in this project.
I'd just say Catherine's been with us since she was the lead designer. For everybody who doesn't know, she was the lead designer from Hoffman when we built the monastery. So she is really a supporter of the sisters and a really great person to be working with. Thank you, Catherine.
Question from Michael. Can you explain the MG&E tariff? That's a good question.
The MG&E tariff, direct connect, basically means that the new solar system going in is being sold from the Holy Wisdom Monastery. And because of the third-party arrangements, there's the Holy Wisdom LLC is the ownership entity between the investors and the Benedictine Women of Madison. And that new system that's being built with that funding is technically directly exporting the solar energy to the MG&E grid. So it goes to the grid at a point, if you can visualize the power line coming into the monastery, just before the power comes to the meters, the main electric meters at the monastery buildings. And that's that point where the new solar energy is fed into the grid. Now, physics says if Holy Wisdom Monastery has whatever it needs for electricity, whether it's coming from one of the power plants, and hopefully whether it's even one of the coal-fired power plants up at Portage that are going to be closed in a couple of years. If it's coming from there, but the solar energy can feed into the grid at that time, the solar is available, it'll come to the line, and that energy will flow right through the meter and right into the monastery or the retreat and guest house. If at a point in time there's so much energy that there's excess, a portion of the energy from the new solar will go into the two buildings. The remainder of it will go out to the grid to be shared with other MG customers, or if you will, your neighbors in a broader sense of community. So that is the arrangement. The pricing on that could be rather complicated, and I'll simply reference that there's a certain amount of money per kWh, kilowatt hour. There's a certain amount of capacity credit. So how much capacity is being added to the grid based on the Midwest Independent System Operator pricing for their localized node in the broader distribution system. And both of those things are playing into the pricing of this. The other important thing to note is that the Benedictine Women of Madison, or the Holy Wisdom Monastery, is acquiring all the RECs, the renewable energy credits. So this gets really into kind of the weeds on things, but let's just say you own all of the renewable energy attributes of that system that feeds directly into the grid. So I hope that answers the question. There's a lot more that could be said, and I would even bring in our third-party investors to discuss that if anyone would like to have further information as a follow-up.
Thank you, Mark. I see a couple questions coming in. At this point, it's past 1:15, so if people have places to be, I would like to just again say thank you for coming and sort of officially close the webinar with thank you for celebrating this with us and being interested to hear all the details. If you would like to stick around, we'll let people leave that don't have any questions, but if you would like to stick around, or maybe you put a question in the chat, I see a couple that just came in, you can stick around and we can, I know Mark and I think at least Toby have no place to run to, so we'll be on for a moment. Thank you again, everyone. Goodbye to anyone who's heading out.
Yeah.
I do see, all right, so a couple of questions, a couple of thanks. Are Charles and Sue still on? Yeah, so there's a question from Charles and Sue. Why are there charge cords on outside outlets when most cars just need an outlet? I don't know if I'm tracking that one, but Mark or Toby, do you know?
What was the question again? Why are there charge cords?
You guys can speak up, Charles, if you're.
Yeah, what I've seen at the guest house, there is a charger with a cord on it.
Yes.
And most cars, I don't think, would require that. They just need an outlet to plug their charger in.
There is an outlet there as well. So if someone wants to charge just directly from the 15 or 20 amp regular household receptacle, they can do that. However, the two chargers, one is a Tesla specific charger, one is a universal charger. Those charge at a higher rate. The wiring that feeds them is a bigger gauge, and so those are 6-hour chargers. Versus if you charge off of a household circuit, I think it's closer to like 24 hours to full charge. So you can use either, but you'll get a quicker charge using one of the established chargers. Which shout out to Renew Wisconsin. We had in our original plans for the retreat and guest house to add in some chargers that we would have to pay for, and through Renew Wisconsin, we were able to get those two chargers and for free, as well as they covered the bulk of the installation.
Okay. I don't think they require 24 hours, more like 12.
Okay. Yeah.
And the ones that are there are probably level 2 chargers, which are 220 volt. Yeah. And again, a Tesla or a Bolt or a Volkswagen, whatever, you'll find one of those should work.
Right. Dennis asks, when will we be seeing the windmills?
you know, you won't be seeing the windmills. You know, there's an interesting comparison there. Some years ago, we went through a very detailed analysis at another site. It happened to be in Ohio, where another religious order had Congregation of St. Joseph had put up a wind tower to get very good measurements of wind. And so we got the data and measurement. We went out in the marketplace to look at what a new wind tower, in this case, it was a 90 kW wind tower, and compared that to solar PV. And at that, if you will, smaller scale, this is nothing like the huge wind machines. Like going out Highway 12, you might notice the 6 fairly large wind tower, much larger than we're talking here, but still not big by today's standards, I'd add. But when we compared doing wind versus doing solar, the solar was at least 25% cheaper. It was much less likely to get objections from neighbors, because if you think about a wind tower up on the hill at Holy Wisdom, that'd be visible to a lot of people. When you think about the new solar field going in, I don't know how many of you have not even noticed it yet. And you certainly aren't going to notice it from the road because you can't see it. And and the other thing was, the wind towers are notorious for lots of maintenance, whereas the solar has proven to be, with the exception of some, depending on the inverters being used, there can be inverter issues sometimes. And by the way, there's extended warranties on the inverters here. Anyway, the wind did not compete is a short answer to that question. So no wind towers in the near future here.
All right. I don't see any other questions. So I think we'll close it out here. We'll be sending out a follow-up email either later today or tomorrow. There will be a survey in there, as well as some links to some more information, and who to contact if you have further questions, either about the project. We can get those detailed questions over to Mark, or questions about how to give. We're happy to help you. So thank you all for being a part of this, and have a good rest of your afternoon.